Hey, FemFreak crew. If you're enjoying the piping hot intersectional feminist analysis and pop culture freakouts we deliver on Feminist Frequency Radio every week, why not join our Patreon community? Head on over to patreon.com/femfreak to help us keep delivering all the feminist media analysis you love. And treat yourself to some of our great perks. Merch discounts, AMAs, bonus episodes, early access, even live events. That's patreon.com/femfreak. Do it today. It has become, just incredibly apparent that Mary Sue has become like a kind of rhetorical cudgel to use against any appearance by a female character that dissatisfies a male fan base. And anyway, I was like, okay, let's talk about this.
Welcome to Feminist Frequency Radio. This is the show that asks you to be critical of the media you love. I'm Anita Sarkeesian, and I'm joined by two women so perfect that their enemies routinely accuse them of being overpowered author inserts. Carolyn Pettit.
Hello.
And Ebony Adams.
Hey, kids.
Today, we're going to be discussing Mary Sue's, the history, the definition, and the connotation of this very loaded character trope. Hello, friends.
Sorry.
How are you today? Ebony's having a moment.
I'm having a moment, yeah.
It's okay. People often laugh at me when I talk to them.
Oh. I'm laughing with you. I'm laughing with you. I am laughing at you often, but today I'm laughing around you.
Ah, well, that doesn't make any sense. Carolyn, how are you? Because Ebony's giving me nothing here.
I'm okay, but I'll tell you one thing that I think serves as proof that I am not a Mary Sue. For the past couple of days, I've had this weird thing going on where my balance or my equilibrium is a little bit off.
Being clumsy is a Mary Sue trait, right?
Is it?
Adorably
yes.
clumsy.
Dang it. Oh, I thought
Adorably clumsy. Yep.
end for once all the losers and the haters who constantly accuse me of being a Mary Sue.
They're right.
But they just, maybe I am. Maybe I am just.
Are you trying to share with us a larger health concern that we're writing off?
It's not really a health. I'm not worried about it on a serious level yet, but it's been this, so I took a nap on Saturday evening. And when I woke up, and I first moved.
That's just going to bed early.
No, well,
right?
You're kind of right. But when I woke up and I first moved, oh my God, just the world just started spinning around me. And I was I grabbed onto the bed. I'm like, what the hell is happening? And
oh my goodness.
It's gotten it hasn't been nearly that severe since, but I do feel there's something a little off. And I feel it's my right ear lately where it's just, and it's God, it's just the worst feeling when it happens, right?
That's
you don't
not
know
good, Carol.
Yeah, it's not good, but I'm hoping that it takes care of itself because I live in the United States and I can't afford health care. So I'm on the don't get sick healthcare plan right now. So I'm trying not to. Anyway, yeah. Fun times.
Cool. Well, let's talk about something totally not important after that.
Yeah. No, it is important. This is what we do. We talk about pop culture because pop culture has the power to change the world, Anita. I'm really tired. Anita, I am so tired of you dismissing the power of pop culture in our lives.
Why won't you acknowledge the importance of pop culture,
Come on,
Anita?
Anita.
Oh, boy. If you've never heard of a Mary Sue, you probably don't hang out in the corners of fandom where geeks and nerds debate characters with the fervor of the Nicene Council. Note to everybody, I didn't know what that meant, and I thought it was some weird nerdy reference that I didn't understand.
And then she looked it up and was like, oh, it is a nerdy reference.
It kind of is.
Religious nerdy reference.
Here we go. The term Mary Sue was originally coined to describe a specific kind of author self-insert in Star Trek fan fiction, but has come to connote any impossibly perfect female character. Someone who is ludicrously and usually exotically attractive, unbelievably talented, and universally beloved. Critics point and laugh at these sorts of one-dimensional figures for a host of reasons: flat writing, flimsy characterization, and author wish fulfillment. But lurking behind some of the valid critiques is, you guessed it, a whole lot of misogyny. Some examples of characters who are accused of being Mary Sues are Captain Marvel, Arya Stark, Rey from Star Wars, Bella Swan from Twilight, Anastasia Steele from 50 Shades of Grey, Furiosa from Mad Max Fury Road, Katniss Everdeen from The Hunger Games. These are just a couple of more mainstream examples. So we want to ask, is the Mary Sue trope / description useful? What does it tell us about our expectations for women in and out of our media?
One thing that immediately jumps out to me here is the idea of one of the traits of the Mary Sue being, ludicrously and usually exotically attractive, because, by far the character who I've heard the most, there's been the most male tears shed over, or tears of rage, and with the words like Mary Sue screamed at the top of their lungs, is Rey from Star Wars. And what's interesting about Rey, there's a lot of things that are interesting about Rey, but in particular is like, I actually think that a lot of the men who rant and rave about Rey being a so-called Mary Sue would be less upset by her if she were more conventionally, like, not attractive but sexualized, right? Like if she were in some way presented in all of her power as still some kind of object. And one thing that I really appreciate about the films is obviously Daisy Ridley is an attractive woman, but she's not, in my view, Rey is not presented as, like va 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 voom, right? There's like nothing in the way that the movie treats her that puts her into that specific box. And go ahead.
I think it's important, just a little bit, I know in the intro we talked about this, but just a little bit of history here, because the Mary Sue is a very, the word means nothing anymore, in my opinion, because the fact that it is being ascribed to characters like Rey makes absolutely no sense to me.
Exactly.
And so it comes from a 1974 Star Trek fanfic called A Trekkie's Tale. And it, at the original Mary Sue really means the female author's avatar, which can be so many different kinds of things. But it has come to, in specifically female fan communities, or like the fan, like hardcore underground fan communities have been using this word. I want to quote this article I read by Pat Flieger. Sorry if I spelled her name wrong. Where she says, Mary Sue is often easy to spot because she's impossible to miss. Put simply, Mary Sue is more. She's more charming, more belligerent, more understanding, more beautiful, more graceful, more eccentric, more spiritual, more klutzy. She has better hair, better clothes, better weapons, better brains, better sex, and better karma than anyone else. Even next to the strong and interesting heroines of 20th century media and fiction, she stands out. She's singular. She is impossible to ignore. And I'll link the article that comes from, because it goes on about it. But I think it's important, and this is what pisses me off about these conversations, is that the term Mary Sue really comes out of fan fiction. And it has become a way for people to ascribe a derogatory term, because it's not necessarily a derogatory thing, but this term that is now used derogatorily against mainstream female characters that people just don't like.
Right.
Yeah, it's used to dismiss any female character, a lead female character that toxic portions of the fandom believe have either no place in the narrative at large or aren't sufficiently deferential to a male lead figure. I want to go back to this notion of attractiveness, because I think you're absolutely right, Caro, that part of the problem for a certain breed of fanboy is that characters like Captain Marvel or Arya Stark or Rey are not sexualized in the ways that we've been expected to have our female characters presented. And so that's one way in which those characters are dismissed. Excuse me. The term Mary Sue has been deployed as a criticism for so many different kinds of characters that the definitions we have for it are functionally useless, So sometimes it means someone who is incredibly exotic, women who are, beautiful, super talented, whatever. But then also it's these women who are, very physically powerful. And there's something for these fanboys, it's something so wrong about the notion of a woman who can beat a man in battle. Oh, she must be a Mary Sue, because that could never happen. We got to talk about the fact that in fan fiction, at any rate, there is a comparable trope called, the Gary stew or the Marty stew or whatever, but that never received the kind of cultural currency that the Mary Sue did.
Which is,
right?
Just to clarify, is the gender, is the male version of the Mary Sue.
Exactly. So going back to like an episode that we just recorded, seeing how the sausage is made, John Wick, right? People don't talk about John Wick as a figure, as a Mary Sue figure. But if you were to take the sort of classic definition of a Mary Sue, he absolutely is, right? But this is not the way that we talk about male characters in fiction.
That's interesting that you say that, because like the one character that I was thinking of in terms of male characters who are like absolutely 100% like the Gary Stew or whatever, but who aren't dismissed in that way is Neo from the Matrix, like chosen one up the wazoo, 5 seconds in the machine or whatever. I know Kung Fu. Like he's basically like, he is the cyber savior. Like he is Jesus. His so far beyond the capabilities of like everyone else. And nobody was like, oh, come on, he didn't like earn that or whatever. It's like, well, but that's his whole trait is that like he doesn't earn it because he's like the one. He's Neo.
Right.
Yeah. I think another example of that is someone like Ready Player One feels very much like a Mary Sue.
And that's absolutely an author insert, like completely. Like that is Ernest Cline putting himself in the center of the story, where his expansive pop culture knowledge, Ernest Cline's extensive pop culture knowledge is what saves the day, what saves the world, what gets him the girl, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So this is absolutely comes down to expectations around gender, what we allow male characters to be imbued with and to get away with versus what we allow female characters to be imbued with and get away with. And to, to go back again to the sexualization / attractiveness point, there's no clearer kind of manifestation of one aspect of this than the fact that, after Captain Marvel or posters started rolling out, there were men who were upset that she wasn't smiling and would like go in and like Photoshop the posters to like make her smile or whatever. Like, if these characters present themselves as being available to men in a certain way, like then they're more okay with it. But it's part of the issue that at least in the modern day battle over, so-called Mary Sues, part of the issue is, these women seem to exist more fully for themselves and less just for me and my consumption of them.
Have you seen the recent claptrap about how Captain Marvel is a villain because she doesn't smile, but also because like she beats up that guy to get her clothes and takes his motorcycle in the film?
Oh my God.
Yeah.
No, I haven't heard that.
It's amazing.
I think that to me, the quintessential example of a Mary Sue in mainstream media, because again, I feel like it can be hard to extrapolate this into mainstream when it comes out of fan fiction, is from Twilight, which did come out of fan fiction. Straight up, Twilight was, everyone knows the story. Twilight was it developed as a fanfic and became this huge, enormous, massive best-selling book and movie series. And then 50 Shades of Grey then also was fan fiction that came out of Twilight. It was Twilight fan fiction.
Right.
So for me, Bella Swan is actually like the quintessential example of a Mary Sue because she's very plain and very sort of quote unquote normal. She's a little bit sad in life. Like she's a little bit awkward. Sorry, I did not mean to connote that awkward and sad were the same thing. She's just moved. She's a little bit sad about where she's at. She's awkward about making new friends. And the hottest, most special dude in the entire world thinks that she is the most special woman in the entire world. Like he is physically and hormonally attracted to her above all else. And all the other women that find him attractive, he does not have eyes for. So like, then the story continues and blah, 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 and all this stuff. But she's very much, she's kind of klutzy. But she's very much just the stand-in of this, like, I hate to use the word average as if that's like a bad thing, but she's just kind of a nothing character. Like, the idea is that not only is it supposed to be like the author insert, but it's the audience insert.
Exactly.
That we all could be Bella Swan, right? And we could all get the hot pedophile vampire guy to want to have babies with us.
Oh, you're selling me on it.
But that's like, I think it's just the quintessential example of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're saying is very important, that the Mary Sue, as she appears in literature or fan fiction, like in the written word, there's something very different there than about her appearance or her supposed appearance in visual media. And so you have a figure like Bella Swan, who, if you just read the books, you might not think of her as like, plain necessarily, but she has a kind of like approachable or attainable beauty that's safely aspirational for the reader.
Like
someone
girl next door hot.
Exactly. But Hollywood very rarely gives us a female object of desire who actually is just sort of plain or average, right? So even if you don't think Kristen Stewart, personally, you don't think she's, overwhelmingly attractive, nevertheless, she fits a model of someone who is, sort of above average attractiveness. So there's something absolutely different about the way that Mary Sue appears in different kinds of media that makes it, again, in many ways, like unworkable as a trope for explaining anything about, about how female characters, appear and negotiate life in their respective, narratives.
So how did the Mary Sue move from being something in fan fiction, which is a predominantly female fandom, and have a pretty specific description? People generally knew what it meant. How did it shift from like becoming this sort of mainstream word to attack or to like denigrate mainstream films that people don't like?
Yeah, because I wonder, as you say, like fan fiction is so still today, still so overwhelmingly female centric that the recognition of like one-dimensional, kind of flimsy author inserts, that criticism comes from other women, right? And there is something fundamentally different about that criticism there than the way that it then becomes something that, I feel like it's almost exclusively, if someone's using the term Mary Sue like with a straight face, sincerely these days, it's almost always some gross dude,
Yeah. It really just feels like a term that was not understood, but it feels like a term that was co-opted as a way, like in the same way that like these toxic male communities just take words like social justice and
or triggered.
Yeah.
Right. I feel like
snowflakes,
what happened,
etc.
Somewhere along the line, a man, or a group of men saw a trend. Maybe it was like one female character or a trend of female characters happening that they didn't like for specific reasons, and they realized or that they could sort of weaponize the term Mary Sue as like a cudgel to with which to kind of attack these characters as being, these are just shallow, like female wish fulfillment characters. They don't have nearly the depth of, say, Luke Skywalker.
I was actually about to use Luke Skywalker as an example. Like, if we're gonna say that if you're gonna accuse some of the movies that we listed earlier, like especially Rey as being a Mary Sue, like you have to then also make the same accusation to Luke Skywalker.
You have to, but of course these men find ways not to. Like they say, they will jump through hoops of absurd logic of how her just going into the Millennium Falcon and like flying it right away is just like nothing Luke does is nearly as wild. Even though it's. There's just moment after moment of Luke in the films doing things that, obviously he can only do because he is a kind of chosen one. He is and he is absolutely the audience, he's the character on which, in a sense, we are meant to project ourselves and our own aspirations and, ideas.
Totally. Let's take a quick break, and when we come back, let's talk about if this term is even valuable anymore.
Hey, Feminist Frequency Radio listeners, we would love for you to join our Patreon community over at www.patreon.com/femfreak. Do it today.
All right. I think it might be useful for us to talk a little bit about like these terms. Like the Mary Sue is a term that had a definition and has evolved, and now it's being used almost as a weapon against female fans and female characters. So is there a way to reclaim it? Is there any value in it? Like, how do you feel about the words in general? And like,
I feel like there is a value to being kind of having our eyes opened to one-dimensional characterizations. So if we can take anything from, this recognition of like, poor writing, like flimsy characterization, that's something that's a value. Because the fact is like alongside wonderful characters like Captain Marvel, you have figures like Black Widow in the Avengers movies, right? Whose story it seems like it's going to go in an interesting direction, but then by the end of Avengers Endgame, it's like they have completely wasted the potential for this character, and yet she bears a lot of the same kind of. Like you could characterize her in a lot of the same ways that you could characterize figures like Rey or Arya Stark or Captain Marvel, like someone who's very physically powerful, someone who's very attractive, someone who, operates and is, universally recognized as being, incredibly talented at what she does, whatever. But by the end of it, she's been incredibly flattened as a character. So I think, there's a way in which we can use the tools that this gives us, or the opportunity that this gives us to kind of unpack what makes for a shitty female representation. That's a good thing we can take from it.
It is, but I mean, at least at this moment in time, and I love to be kind of proven wrong, but it's hard for me to see the term, that specific term itself, Mary Sue, being like fully extracted and reclaimed from the cesspool of misogyny that it has become so thoroughly drenched in, and all the connotations of just sexism that with which it's now so often employed. I mean, I'm all for looking at characters through a critical lens and asking ourselves, like, is this character three-dimensional? Are they developed? Like, does this arc that they're given? What does the arc kind of mean or say, or how is it used or misused? If anything, I feel like the value is in sort of pushing back against the sentiment or the spirit with which Mary Sue has been taken and used to say, like, okay, that lens that you're using is misogynist bullshit. Let's here is a lens that is actually valuable and useful, that we
like
should,
the Smurfette principle.
Sorry?
Like the Smurfette principle, Anita, Carol, right? Here's a way we can talk about female representation in media that doesn't bear with it. The framework doesn't have the misogynist baggage that the Mary Sue does at this point.
Yeah, but I think something to bear in mind as you make that comparison is that there are certain measures, like more quantitative measures that we can ascribe to media to be like, is this friendly to women, or are there just more women involved, which is different than the qualitative. So the Bechdel test and the Smurfette principle are literally just about numbers. You can't necessarily use it for nefarious purposes. It's just counting. Whereas something like the Mary Sue is more about like the quality of a character. And that I think will always be tricky. Like, I think that will always be a little bit debatable in terms of how individuals see it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, yeah, that's the fact that there is, a sturdier framework for that kind of critique, is its strength. It's
Yeah,
certainly not the only
and
framework by which to view something, but because there's less ability to be kind of, nebulous, about what you're pointing to, there's that it allows for more robust analysis.
yeah, and I think it's absolutely necessary that our and I think this is what is happening and has happened, is that our analysis has moved to the quantitative, so that we have these large tentpole conversations, or we used to, about like strong female characters, which again is not easy to it's not easy to just like point this, that, and the other. You have to sort of dig into the meat of it. It's not an easy like statistical analysis. And so it's allowed us over time to have conversations about depth and flaws and different ways of writing female characters and presenting them. And so we have to have this conversation about like, I don't know if the Mary Sue is the best example of like, this is going to move us forward, because it's not really like it's not really foundational in mainstream media, right? It's foundational in fan fiction, but fan fiction is never meant to be mass consumed, right? So I think of it very differently in terms of, I guess I'm veering us off into a bit of a different tangent in terms of like how we talk about.
No, we're going with you on this journey, Anita. Keep going.
Oh, thanks. But I like, you, Ebony, it was your idea. I'm outing you. It was your idea to talk about Mary Sue's, and I sort of was like, oh, I guess. Like, I don't really care.
Yeah. The reason why
but I think it's
as a topic.
It's an interesting conversation for sure.
Yeah. The reason why I broached it as a topic was because it was at the time. I think we were like, and I say we. I don't even watch the show. But we're like 2 or 3 episodes from the end of Game of Thrones, and folks, it just seemed like so much of the chatter online about those final episodes was about Arya Stark as a Mary Sue. And I was like, even as someone who doesn't watch Game of Thrones, this seems like a really bullshit criticism to level at this character who spent like 8 seasons, evolving into something. And then when she demonstrates that she has, reached that goal, for her to be dismissed for doing such, like killing the Night King or whatever, I just thought like, okay, let's talk about this.
Yeah.
It has become, just incredibly apparent that Mary Sue has become like a kind of rhetorical cudgel to use against any appearance by a female character that dissatisfies a male fan base. And anyway, and I was like, okay, let's talk about this.
Yeah.
And I wonder if some of the anger, some of the psychological baggage that men are bringing to their weaponization of the term Mary Sue is in a way about like trying to limit or control the kinds of things that women aspire to or imagine for themselves, right? Like, so when a fan fiction writer inserts herself into, which I mean, why not? Like, it's your imagination. You can tell any story about
literally
yourself
your fantasy. It's literally your fantasy.
Right. But it's not going to be typically, I mean, maybe some exceptions like Twilight to some degree aside, but it's often not a fantasy about like, finding like the best, the husband, like the man who can provide for me the best and like whatever, being, giving him babies, etc. Like, it's a fantasy about being the hero. It's a fantasy about, taking a role that maybe men feel has traditionally been theirs. And so on some level, these men like negatively, they want to say, no, you're not supposed to want that place. Like, that's my place. You're supposed to want these other things.
I agree.
Yeah, like how dare you write your fulfillment, your wish fulfillment, write mine.
Yeah, I would also just like to remind everyone that the term Mary Sue came out of like Star Trek fan fiction where the women were fucking Spock or Kirk. Like, it was very much like they were getting the guy kind of thing, which is different. Fair, but
but it was like it was their.
But they
desire.
solved the problem or whatever, right? Like their one,
Like it wasn't about fulfilling a man's desires. It was about fulfilling their own desires, which is completely different.
Totally. In terms of the question I posed right after the break about like, is this term valuable still? Can we reclaim it? I feel like it's still a valuable term. So I feel tension with it because I believe that words can evolve and change and like not words. I don't know. You know what I mean? Like
absolutely. Language is
language evolves and
constantly
changes. And I don't want to be a stickler for like, oh, this term can never mean anything different. And I think that there is value to the original or the origins of the Mary Sue and the sort of evolution from the author stand-in, which could literally mean anything, to the audience stand-in, which usually means something fairly generic. If you're trying to deal with a larger audience, I think there's value in having a language to.
Yeah.
I think there's value in having that term and language to describe that. I think the problem is, as you've both stated, is like I don't know if we can pull it back from the reins of misogyny at this point.
Another thing, and part of what I think a lot of men don't recognize or about the existence of Mary Sues in the first place is that part of the reason women were probably motivated to create these stories and to create a women-led, Star Trek like world of fan fiction is because the stories on television and in the movies and so on weren't giving them the kinds of roles and representations that they crave. Like they have, we as women often have to some degree, create those narratives or to some degree for ourselves because we don't get them or, historically we haven't gotten them anywhere else. Right. So men can look at Kirk, white men anyway, can look at, have always been able to look at all these heroes and see themselves to some degree or another. Whereas, and this is obviously slowly changing to some degree, but, women have, there was a real lack there, an absence. So of course women are going to want to create stories in which they get to be the hero.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that a lot of fandom, like the art that comes out of fandom, there is such a large history of telling stories that aren't being told by the mainstream media or taking stories and universes and environments that we love and turning them into spaces where we get to actually participate or we get to see our stories in them.
Yeah.
Ebony, would you like to regale us with some of your fan fiction?
I would love to. I'm not prepared to do it in this moment, but I can, if you give me a second, can open up my Google Drive folders.
I mean, we can give you all the seconds in the world for that.
Yeah.
I have the biggest grin on my face right now about the idea of us possibly getting a look into your fan fiction.
That should be a bonus. That can't just be
it should
for
definitely be a bonus.
All right, that just can't be for the workaday FemFreak listeners. That's got to be for the bonus listeners who've been with us from jump.
Mm-hmm. You mean the people giving us money?
Yeah, give us money and I'll read you my fanfic. How about this? Give us more money. I'll write fanfic with you as a character.
Ooh, I want to know that.
Give us even more money. I will write you into the fanfic. Into fanfic and as a character of your choosing in the fandom of your choosing. And I promise I will not know anything about that world before I start it. So like, if you're like, write me into, I don't know, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, it'll be my version of what Buffy is.
Hey,
in that
I have
world.
a request already.
Yeah.
Can I request a fan fiction with you and me in elementary?
Ooh.
Yeah, absolutely. Which, speaking of that, I think we missed the season premiere.
What?
Wait, is elementary still going?
Yeah, there's a final season.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah, so I absolutely will do that, Anita.
I like 10 years from now, we're going to get the very first film. This is going to take off. And 10 years from now, we're going to get the very first film in the EEU, the Ebony Extended Universe.
Yes.
Oh my God. And people will be like desperate for me to give them the next chapter. Like, people are constantly on George R.R. Martin, people just constantly be hollering at me to finish the books. And I'll take my sweet monkey ass time with it.
All right, y'all. Let us know what you think about the Mary Sue. Do you think it's useful? Do you think that the description has changed too much? What is your relationship with this trope? Let us know on Patreon. Patreon.com/FemFreak. All right, let's take a quick break and we will be back with our weekly freakouts.
Hey, Feminist Frequency Radio listeners, why don't you join our Patreon community at patreon.com/FemFreak? You'll love it. Now, on with the show.
Now it is time to talk about what's been thrilling us, moving us, upsetting us, or infuriating us this past week. Carolyn Pettit, what has been making you feel feelings?
This past week, I watched on the Criterion channel, or yes, the website where you get access to all the Criterion films. I watched a film called Girlfriends. It's from 1978. It was made by a filmmaker named Claudia Weil and stars Melanie Mayron. It has Christopher Guest in it, Eli Wallach. But so this is a film about a young, early 20s woman living in New York. She's like an aspiring photographer. It's really about focused on her aspirations, her dreams, her effort to make a name for herself and to, find just success both kind of professionally and personally, romantically, and so on. And it's just interesting to remember that. We talk so much now about the need, obviously, for women, for female-centered stories, and that there are more and more of those. But I think sometimes we can forget that that there were such stories. I mean, they weren't successful. They weren't. This film was made on a shoestring budget. They kept running out of money, so it was actually made over a period of 3 years because they kept running out of money, and then they'd have to scrounge up more money. And then finally they'd be able to shoot some more, and then they'd run out of money again. And so obviously there wasn't big studio backing. There wasn't funding. I mean, Claudia Weil, the filmmaker, worked tooth and nail to get this film made, which she shouldn't have had to do necessarily. And it is, it is a quote unquote small film. It is a character focused, quote unquote Carolyn film. But for one, it's so relatable, even today, this a woman she's a photographer. She's struggling to break through to get some recognition for her work. It's obviously, of course, something that so many women today still experience and can relate to. Certainly, in my own experiences as a writer or critic trying to get some kind of break, trying to get some kind of job, trying to get some money. But I think it's a very good film, and it's also great to sometimes to just look at the tradition of female focused films and storytelling that maybe predates the current era, and that we ourselves as individuals may not be fully aware of, as I'm not. So there's that historical element, but also just the pleasure of watching what I thought was a good film that really looks at a woman's inner life, and it's a very interesting, very layered, 3-dimensional, fascinating film. So it's called Girlfriends. It's on the Criterion streaming website service thingamabob.
Nice. Ebony, what are you feeling feelings about?
I'm feeling feelings about a show on Netflix called The Rain. It is a Danish post-apocalyptic series about these two siblings, Simone and Rasmus, who have been living in a bunker for 6 years alone. Because the titular Rain has carried a virus that has wiped out most of life. I think in Scandinavia, but possibly the whole world. And their father, who was a biochemist, was able to get them into this bunker to protect them. And so the story starts when they emerge from the bunker, meet up with these other young people, and try and sort of go on a journey to figure out what this virus is, if it was in fact man-made, who created it, for what purpose, etc. I mean, it's Danish. I'm in. It's post-apocalyptic. I'm in. They live in a bunker. There's no one who can get at them. What? Are you kidding me? That's my dream life. So
Wow.
The Rain on Netflix. It's Danish. The country has, 17, 18 people tops. So there's some people from The Bridge in it. There's some people from, the Department Q movies in it. It's like a warm, fucked up blanket for me. So check it out. And along with this trend of things being like a tight 6 to 8 episodes per season, God, love it. So invest some time. The Rain on Netflix.
Excellent. My freak out this week is I have been playing Dishonored: Death of the Outsider.
And killing people and not stealing their faces.
Yes. That's exactly what's been happening. So this game, it came out in 2007. I played one mission and then never played it again.
2017.
Yes, that is the accurate year. Oh boy.
It's like, wow, has it been that long since the Dishonored games already?
Well, I was
old.
like, holy shit, this came out in 2017. Like, it felt like so long ago. I mean, it felt like just yesterday, but that was like 2 years ago.
Yep.
I guess a year and a half. It came out in September. But so it is a standalone expansion pack that came after Dishonored 2. It is in the Dishonored universe. And I don't know. I just wanted to play a game and I didn't know what to play. And I realized I hadn't finished this. And I really like the Dishonored world. So I thought I would pick it back up. The thing is, I don't remember how to play games after I put them down. And so it's taken me like a little bit to remember how this game actually works. And so I've murdered a lot more people than like really gruesomely murdered masses of people in this. It's an immersive sim. It's sort of a stealth game if you're not familiar. Anyways, one of the powers in it, in this particular version, in Death of the Outsider, is a power called Semblance. So you can take any living NPC, you can take their face as a temporary disguise to help you get past guards and get into certain places, just like walking through. But I kept the joke that Ebony just made is because I tweeted the other day about how like I out loud said, fuck, I keep killing them instead of taking their faces, which is only a thing you can say. Which is only a thing you can say when you're playing video games or you're a serial killer. I don't know.
Yeah.
And yeah, so anyways, I enjoy it. I really like this universe. It's worth, if you never play the Dishonored games, I think it's worth going and playing them. I will say that the first Dishonored is really terrible to women. We've talked about this at length before. I'm not sure if we did on the podcast, but the second game is way better. And then this one is obviously like a smaller add-on, but it's still pretty cool. And it is actually the end of this particular version of the Dishonored universe. I don't know if they're ever going to make any more games, but it's an end of these characters. Yeah. So yeah, I don't know. That's what I've been doing.
Nice.
Right on.
Yeah. Video games.
Yeah.
Who knew?
Right.
Caro knew.
Yeah, man, I'm really rusty. It's been a long time since I played like a big game.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, the games are hard. All right. I thought Carolyn was going to make some snappy joke at me, but she didn't.
She was too busy reeling.
Yeah.
Reeling from the truth.
You can submit your own freak out at feministfrequency.com/freakout. That's FREQOUT. Thanks so much for listening to Feminist Frequency Radio. Stay tuned for the Freakin' After Party, which is only available to backers of this podcast. You can learn more at patreon.com/femfreak. This show is engineered by Rob Pera. Sarah Norales provides technical support, art by Jamie Varon, and intro music by Phil Circus. You can find us everywhere great podcasts are found. If you haven't yet, please go to iTunes and subscribe, rate, and review us. And you can follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and all the social medias at FemFreak. Join us next week for another feminist dive into pop culture. Thanks for listening.
Bye, folks.
Later.